Welcome to the very first episode of The Reading Rookie, a podcast type series talking about books that just piqued my interest and yours. I'm your host, Mike. How's everyone doing today? It's currently midnight right now. I kind of feel like a late talk show host, but I'm doing pretty good right now. I'm still awake. I'm probably gonna hit up the gym at about early 11 o'clock a.m. Today. But yeah, I couldn't find any other time to record except now. Everyone's asleep, so I figure why not. I guess I should start explaining what this is all going to be, and it'll be much easier to imagine if you think about my old series, Honest Reads. Just without my face and keeping in the voice. It's a great way for me to keep up with the stories and books that don't have any other forms of media or books or video games or anything tied to them. So don't come into this series expecting like comparisons or top tier editings. This is not a BBM. This is mainly just a low-key, like chill review, and it's just mainly audio. And I also say podcast, but not in the traditional sense, because as much as I would like to say just about anything, like, of course, you know, like, yeah, just talking normally and such with the occasional break or two. I live close to an airport, and they fly so freaking low, I could practically just high-five them outside my window. It's so loud, and it's not like I have a legit recording studio or anything, so I do the best I can to hide it, which usually results in cuts. I'm sure nobody would mind if I just implemented a cut every now and then, but I'll try my best to talk freely and let loose, because that's what I really want these episodes to be. Just a chill, relaxing experience. And I have my notes right now, but I'll probably go a little bit off script, just so you know, like, it's all natural right now. I'm just trying to chill, just talk with you guys. Every now and then I'll take a water break. My voice isn't as strong as it used to be in the past, so I get a little tired every now and then. But yeah, this is what I want the episodes to be. Really chill, really relaxed. Not everyone has the time to sit down and read a book. Well, that's what I would say if we weren't sane in the pandemic, but people still gotta go to work and do things, and just allow me to relieve you out of your boredom for give me like an hour to talk about some book I picked up. And sometimes it'll be what you guys recommend. Other times I'll just pick a book that I want to talk about. And usually the things I want to talk about are mainly around psychology or mental health or mysteries. I love good mystery. And creative nonfiction too. I've been getting into those a lot lately. Mainly because of their authenticity. So if you know any good ones, send them my way. But for these two episodes, they're my personal choice. Books I've been curious about for a while now. At first, they were mainly chosen just to give the episodes a test run, seeing what can be improved on based on the feedback. But now, with how the state of the world is, I actually think they could come in handy. I really think so. Pure coincidence with the timing, but the news has been so depressing lately. And I'm sure we can all listen to something that at least gives us some hope for the future. Like, every day I hop on Twitter, I'm reading the news, and I'm just instantly bummed out. Like, sometimes it just affects my day. So, and coming back to this book that we're going to talk about today, it's pretty uplifting. And it also talks about ferrets. The main selling point for me. That's the one thing that I took out of it that really captured my interest. Before Our Adventures is a self-help creative nonfiction hybrid that follows the personal story of the author Charles P. Hammerton and how he came to appreciate this new perspective on life with the help of his pet ferret named Bandit. There is going to be some talk of abuse, self-harm, depression, and suicide, so if those subjects aren't your cup of tea, I recommend just jumping ahead to the lessons and conclusion sections, which have much more positive notes of this story. Also, if I can have someone to timestamp these episodes, you will forever be my favorite and will always be pinned in the comments. At least until I figure out the new timestamp feature YouTube does now automatically. I think you've already seen it. The way where you just enter a video or like a video essay and it already splits like the time in different points of the discussion. I hope you guys know what I'm talking about, but it's pretty evident when she looked at like the red bar and it's just in pieces. But yeah, this isn't a pretty story. I was honestly surprised because I found this shared on a Facebook post, which makes sense because he's more active on that site. I don't remember exactly what the post was about, but they introduced Charlie and Bandit as this duo traveling around Europe and just experiencing the world. It was the very definition of an adventure, and that's what I was kind of expecting from this book, but it's mainly an origin story. It's telling before their adventures. I should have gained that just from reading the title alone. How Charlie came to be the man he is now, and how a ferret potentially saved his life. I do not regret this read, and I hope you all can gain something from just listening to this man's story because it's pretty relatable, and he wrote with the sole purpose to empower his readers, motivate them, give them a variety of life advice he gathered from these painful experiences so that they could apply them to their own life. So allow me to describe his life. I don't know how long it'll be, but I hope you all enjoy it. Let us talk about this man's hardships before his adventures. Now, Charlie didn't have the greatest teenage experience. Just breaking up with his high school sweetheart and getting ready for the pressures of college, his parents were going through a divorce, and it wasn't an easy one either, mainly because his mom manipulated his feelings towards his dad. Whenever she spoke of him, Charlie would just see him as this bane of evil that should never be associated with. She really drove a wedge between them, but Charlie had no reason to doubt. I mean, this was his mom, the woman who raised and nurtured him. And seeing how she was the one being real vocal about it, there was little room to avoid hearing such bad mouthing. But on a day when his dad was coming to visit and his mom got extremely paranoid to lock the doors and keep him out, Charlie realized for himself that he wasn't going to do that. Hearing a lot from his mom, he was curious to hear his dad's side of things and allowed the man inside. What followed was a calm conversation between the two men, apologizing for the months of unnecessary distance caused between them, since those feelings of anger and resent weren't truly Charlie's, but bounced off him like a soundboard. So that relationship was mended, and as time passed, his parents were finally living their own separate lives. Charlie also decided to drop out of college and train to join the Royal Air Force, or RAF. For the time being, it was a comfortable lifestyle. He was going around doing odd jobs, living with his mom and her new lover Tom. He even got a job at the business they started together, which was mainly maintaining boats and teaching swimming lessons. Earning £20 a day, it was better pay than what he was doing prior, and Charlie could only be grateful for the opportunity. But it all went downhill for him once he got the devastating news that his mom suffered a violent stroke. For the next couple of months, she stayed in the hospital needing to rehabilitate and regain the memory of her family again. But outside the hospital, Charlie had to learn about Tom's neglectful side. It was a stressful time for the both of them, but it was Charlie who burdened all the responsibility on his shoulders. Tom began to slack off at work and left the team to handle duties that weren't even his, without any pay too. Couldn't even make anything to fix up his car to visit his mom or friends. To top on more bad news, due to administrative issues, he failed at his second chance getting to RAF. You could say that this was the beginning of Charlie's negative thoughts forming, which seem accurate as he holds off on going into detail about the things he had to endure while living with this man he used to think of as friendly, except for this one incident where Tom just flew off the handle. The moment he grabbed Charlie by the throat and threatened to put him into foster care, Charlie didn't want anything to do with him anymore. He quit the swimming business and began cleaning cars for £5. With just a vacuum and sponge, he could make £50 a day, earning enough to at least afford bus trips to visit his mom and friends. Being the first kind of pay he earned in weeks, it was a blessing, but that didn't help from what happened next. While Charlie was off being self-dependent, Tom started spraying lies about the boy, saying how irresponsible and lazy he was for not helping out more. He tried to cry to Charlie's older sisters, but they weren't buying it. So he started telling these fibs to the family members visiting Charlie's mom in the hospital. Those were the people who treated Charlie different, with a look of disdain and arrogance. That went on for quite a while, but against his better judgment, Charlie continued to live with this man and his toxicity. It was the easier choice at the time. He had a ton of pride that couldn't be spooked, Whatever the reason, this was not doing his mental health any justice. It became a daily chore to go about his day while Tom's negative opinions swirled around his mind, affecting the way he thought of himself and actually thinking he was a terrible person for not helping out more. He was being gaslighted in his own home. And you would think that when Charlie's mom finally returned to the hospital, things would somewhat get back to a place of normalcy, but Tom's true colors were already shown and their relationship was pretty much established. With luck, Charlie would find a new job at a plant maintenance yard working £4 an hour, which was rough, but it did allow him to work more with nature. He was also attempting his third try getting into RAF, and while his co-workers and supervisors joked around his numerous past attempts, Charlie didn't find anything funny. He kept his ambitions high in the hopes of receiving this golden ticket to take him away from this life he's been living. He wasn't just looking for a promising career in the military, he was also looking for any means to leave. Sadly, Tom beat him to it. Not only because he wasn't able to handle the double task of running the business and being an in-house nurse to Charlie's mom, but his relationship with Charlie was also becoming too much to handle. Charlie was ready to accept this, but his mom was completely in love with Tom and begged him to come back within a matter of days. She depended on his love and assistance while she recovered and knew that Charlie would soon be out of the house for military duty, so the problem would eventually resolve itself. For Tom's benefit, not Charlie's, and having to watch her give away all her love and control to this man was hard to watch. He took control of her finances. He continued to spread lies about the lazy, no good, troublesome Charlie to the point that no one would want to hear his side of the story. And he didn't come to Charlie if he had a problem. Oh no. Instead, he fed those problems to Charlie's mom, attempting to drive the wedge between them and manipulating her already corrupted mind. Still, he continued to live with all that, believing that he could hold out long enough for his RAF start date, but all the lies and manipulation games were slowly rotting in his mind and soul, and it just got weirder around Christmas 2013 when Tom was surprisingly acting all nice around Charlie, buying him a new pair of socks, buying dinner for the family. To Charlie, it felt completely out of character, but things kinda returned to normal once Tom abandoned the house for a second time. His mom told him that it was because of him, but Charlie pieced together his own reason why, which involved the possibility of Tom seeing another woman. The real reason would soon present itself as his sister talked with Tom and was relaying an ultimatum left for Charlie. Leave home and I'll come back to look after your mother. Do not return. Believing that this would have been the best option for his mom's health and happiness, and the fact that he was going to be joining the military in a couple months, Charlie made the decision to leave and become homeless. He spent a couple of winter nights in the woods holding strongly to his pride and trying to brave Tom's test, but eventually he swallowed his ego for just a second and accepted charity from his best friend's mom, Samantha. This woman would instantly become his adopted mom, as she also had experience with difficult parental upbringings and welcomed him with open arms. She allowed him to live there until his RAF start date, but in reality, he called her living room sofa a peaceful home for the following 3 years. Without having to deal with the toxicity of his actual family, Charlie had time to focus on himself, his job, and meeting those RAF appointments until the time came when he passed his final selection test and had his start date at the recruit training center, RAF Hammerton. Christmas never felt so peaceful for Charlie, and being accepted into this new family of his, he didn't want to let his past feelings of depression get them down, so he boxed those underlying emotions for the sake of the mood, trying to keep his spirits high, not knowing at the time that those same feelings would explode on a later date. After Christmas, he checked up on his mom and learned that after his choice to leave home, Tom didn't come back to the house, making Charlie realize that she was being used as blackmail to shame him. So, with the time he had before leaving, he spent those weeks taking care of his mom, trying to patch up their distorted relationship. Tom wasn't living there, but he occasionally came over to pick her up for dates, and being the better person, Charlie would always be on the ready to forgive and put their muddy past behind them. But Tom never so much as passed a glance at him. This time it was his pride that was holding back any means to amend, and definitely the kind of behavior from someone who's letting the anger fester and waiting for the first slip up to strike, which eventually happened. You see, after Tom left the house, Charlie's mom turned to drinking and smoking to fill those lonely hours, despite the doctor's orders. Charlie made it a habit to drive her around for hospital checkups and leisure time around town, but he didn't condone all those efforts going to waste. So when she called him to pick her up from a friend's house, he refused, letting her know that he didn't want any part in their smoking and drinking. So she called Tom instead, and on that ride back, he professed to her that if he ever saw Charlie again, he'd kill him. But Charlie wasn't going to go along with this man's exaggeration, so he challenged that threat. The next time Tom came over to pick her up, Charlie would happily open her door and say, "Hey Tom, what's up?" Nothing. Every time. And now, by the end of January 2014, Charlie was getting ready to start his life in the military and leave behind his broken home. He signed up for a minimum 4-year service as an enlisted airman since he couldn't apply for an aircrew position because of budget cuts, but at least he was getting the experience. Looking back on his hardships and what he had to endure up to this point, Charlie felt confident that he was ready to accept what this all was and move on. But it wasn't easy just to abandon all his problems. Just 3 weeks into training, he gets a call from a debt collecting agency about energy bills Tom neglected to pay. He couldn't just ignore those issues because at the end of the day, she was still family, and there was little guarantee for her care. Charlie graduated from Hammerton on April 1st, 2014, and he had just a few days of leave before shipping out to a camp in Yorkshire to complete his second phase of training. He took this time to visit his mom, learning that Tom briefly moved back in just to leave again, but at this point Charlie didn't want to get into it and left it her business. And then came the fight. It happened over Charlie's dog Dusty, who was staying with his mom since his dad's narrow boat was too small to house the dog. Charlie was going to take the dog for the weekend while visiting his dad, but because Tom himself grew fond of Dusty, this became a problem one morning. Still in his boxers, Charlie watched as Tom got out of his car and demanded Dusty, which Charlie refused. Tom made the first move and grabbed Charlie's arm, trying to move him and shouting warnings that he was a force not to be reckoned with. He then goes for the throat, but that's as far as Charlie allows him to act, as he used his momentum to toss him on the recliner. He then tells Tom to calm down, which angered Tom even more, to grab Charlie by the waist. By this point, there's an audience on the street watching the fight. All the neighbors are in time just to see a grown-ass man thrown out into the garden by a skinny pale kid, who then proceeded to pin Tom until he called uncle. Anyone could see this was Charlie's victory over the man who tormented him for so long. He put on some clothes and called the police to report the incident in fear that Tom might call first and report this as some assault on him. The first to come was Charlie's dad, who was not expecting an enraged Tom to step in front of him and belittle his son. Then the police came, wanting to question them individually, but Tom further embarrassed himself by refusing to cooperate. Though all of this must have been fulfilling for Charlie to see, it was incredibly frustrating to see his own mom wobble out of the car and console Tom. To watch someone that close to you show their complete lack of interest sucked. Once the police finished up and left, Charlie approached his mom asking why. Why did you go to this man who decided to freaking attack me? But all she could say was sorry. His response then was regretting seeing her, and he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't visit her after that incident. And from that day, it would take a while before either of them will see each other. Time flies by and Charlie is already settled into the life of an airman based in Lincolnshire. His job was secure, he had a clear career path, and he truly felt free from the shackles of his former life. Through his sisters, he heard the news about his mother's condition worsening, and Tom still came and went whenever he pleased. As much as he ached for her, having very little to do with her was the best way for both of them to live. Even with the company of his adopted mom Samantha, there was still some emptiness in his heart, and it would soon be filled on a frosty morning, March 15th. Driving down the heart of Balmer County, he encountered a wild stoat trying to race him down the road. This gave him the idea to own his own, since cats weren't allowed and there wasn't enough space for dogs. What is it with this book and dogs not having enough space? Come on, man. He couldn't own the stoat because they weren't domestic creatures, so he turned his attention to the next best thing: ferrets. To his surprise, there was a small ferret rescue center called New York Ferret Rescue just near the perimeter fence of the airbase, so he arranged a visit with the owners. Looking through the selection of Hobbs and Jills, which I guess are terms for male ferrets and female ferrets, there was one small boy that got his moment to shine and knocked down everything in sight, in the little playpen at least. But this was the one. This little furry cat snake thing, he decided to call Bandit. After being heckled by all his superiors about keeping the ferret on base, Charlie collected the required signatures and brought Bandit to his new quarters. They would spend the majority of their time walking around the airbase every night after work, and those walks would eventually evolve to more adventurous places like the woods or the towns and beaches. It wouldn't be long until Charlie got the reputation as the Ferret Man. Bandit became sort of a mascot. He was very popular around the base, at least with most of his friends, and even had a job clearing out rats at the section's bar. From his base to back home, almost everyone loved Bandit, and the bond he and Charlie grew was something incredible. Bandit would make Charlie's shoulders his favorite spot. The trust was deep enough that Charlie didn't need to use a leash for walks anymore. Just a call would be enough for the critter to come back, resting on his shoulders. It was the kind of friendship you saw in movies, the kind that just seemed so perfect, so cheesy, but it was kind of heartwarming, and you couldn't actually believe it was possible. But for these two, it was. So a couple months passed and Charlie felt okay visiting his mom again during his free weekends, but only on limited occasions to protect his own sanity and mental health. They met up at coffee shops and when Tom wasn't around, at her new home, and talking amongst themselves. Charlie learned more about her worsening condition and Tom's control over her. She didn't have any control of her money, she was regularly told what to wear, her time outside the house was regulated, and he would still disappear without any explanation. She also claimed that Tom threw her speech therapist out the door because he suggested that Tom should take care of her better. Finally, Charlie just comes out with a direct approach, asking his mom if Tom was abusing her. And she said yes. That's all it took for Charlie and his sisters to relocate her quickly. They got help from her gardener, who's always been a mutual friend of their parents, and agreed to let her stay at his place. Borrowing a work van and a new member from his section, Charlie drove to his mom's place Friday morning and began packing up all her necessary belongings while Tom was at work. It took an hour to clean her presents and drive her to the gardener's house, and after hugging her and getting a tearful thank you, Charlie felt real warmth and compassion from her that he hadn't felt in months. He was sure that she would be safe now. In a couple days, he would soon be shipping out for a 4-month detachment to the Falkland Islands, so knowing that he was able to accomplish this before his departure cleared a wave of anxiety in his mind. So with his mom in good hands, Charlie got ready for his departure. Bandit was arranged to stay at the rescue center while he was away, settled with a crowd of female ferrets, so I don't think he'd be too lonely. He would have been just fine. Charlie returned back to Samantha's house for one last weekend, enjoying the morning air until we got a call from one of his sisters. They were supposed to meet for breakfast later that day, but the call had nothing to do with that. It was about their mom. Tom called her and brought her back to his place demanding an explanation. Her response? Charlie forced her to leave. Everyone was at a loss for words. After all the thought and work done to make sure she was kept far away from this terrible man, not only did she give herself up quickly, but she placed the blame on the people around her, on her own kids. It was the kind of betrayal that you would never expect your own mother to do. Charlie was really heartbroken. Time after time again, he did everything humanly possible to preserve this relationship of theirs, and just about every time, it always went sour. He was so sure that this time, she was trusting him. She was actually putting her life into his hands to save her, but that just made him question her further. Was she just lying about the abuse? If not, why would she just throw all their efforts back at their faces? How could she betray his efforts so easily for a guy who's been known to be difficult ever since they met? This became the final act that triggered Charlie's dark road to depression and suicidal thoughts. Just before his 18-hour flight to the South Atlantic, he took a small penknife and released all those bottled years of pain and hurt through a cut between his index finger and thumb. This was the first time inflicting pain and enjoying the rush it gave. And it surely wasn't the last. For the majority of his time at RAF Mount Pleasant, Charlie continued to carve his skin. During that first month of deployment, he was caught by a friend and tried to lie about it being Bandit's claws, which doesn't make any sense because that was he saw Bandit a month ago, and those scars probably look pretty fresh. They would have healed by now, but it was a crappy excuse, but he got away with it. And from then, he promised himself to try and do other things to distract himself and keep his cover as the happy guy everyone knew him as. He went to the gym a lot. He started going to a lot of social events, getting mad drunk. Yet those didn't stop his friends being concerned, not knowing that he started to conceal his cuts on his upper inner arm. It got even worse when he started working as a battlefield ambulance driver, spending most of his time alone reading, watching documentaries, learning German, and cutting himself. He was all alone, so there was no one to stop him. His cuts were starting to get sore and swollen, but it didn't lessen the satisfaction he got ripping his flesh into two. But his absolute worst experience, oh my god, happened one night when Leonardo DiCaprio's The Revenant was screening at the airbase's small theater. Focused mainly on DiCaprio's painful sounds as he desperately clung to life, Charlie was frozen in the seat. He didn't know what was going on. He was struggling to breathe and allowed his own mind to flash back to specific moments of his life. Moments when his mom suffered a stroke, all those depressing visits to the hospital, and the miserable time he had living with that SOB Tom. He was confused about these sudden flashbacks, thinking his life wasn't that damaging enough to deserve them, but the lack of attention to his well-being brought them out, as well as more self-harm sessions until he felt content with himself. He was 8,000 miles away from home, from Samantha, from Bandit. All the good things that kept him afloat were out of reach and made his time at the Falkland Islands a literal hell. But after enough time, finally feeling defeated, Charlie said enough was enough and relied on his basic training friends to help him find help via a RAF minister on site. After a couple of days and conversations, the minister suggested Charlie to seek medical help, which he had been putting off because if any mental health issues were placed on his record, there wasn't going to be any chance for his career in aviation. But he couldn't ignore his emotions any longer and risked his future for help, which ended up not being as helpful as he hoped for. After that disappointing encounter with the medical nurse, he started to find a quiet place to relax and write out his suicide note. He used to believe that escaping to the islands would help him forget his problems, but according to the minister, those problems were magnified since you had all the free time in the world to focus on those issues, and worse, without any real means to solve them from where he was. He was so far away. He couldn't help his mom, so Charlie felt cornered, and the only way to finally really relieve himself was to end it all. His final solution. He hid his note in the case of his cell phone whenever he was ready to die at a moment's notice. For the remaining month before returning home, he suffered in silence, fantasizing about the possible ways to kill himself. Just before his flight back home, he came to an understanding that by not talking to his mom, his life could at least be bearable, and that was enough for him to bury away his tendencies of self-harm and suicidal thoughts on the way home. He returned, more broken than when he left. He was having more nightmares keeping him up and panic attacks that would just creep up on him at random times of the day. His days of cutting were behind him, but suicide now sat at the back of his head, ready to come out whenever he felt the need. One of the first things he did back was contact his mom for a meetup. One final meetup to just say, you know what, let me just let it all out right now. Let me tell you, I don't want to see you anymore. You've been the cause of all this. But after witnessing for himself the fragile state she was in, all veiny and too weak to even walk on her canyon anymore, he couldn't go through with it. All those feelings of sympathy came back, and all he wanted to do was just talk with his mom. The conversation started sweet, I'll tell you that, talking about Christmas and the islands until Charlie asked the real questions as to why she betrayed his efforts, or when she didn't do anything during his fight with Tom. She never answered and avoided the topic completely, switching the conversation to the reasons why Tom was always leaving, supporting Charlie's suspicions. he really was seeing another woman. I'm sorry, around this part, this is just my own speculation of how the events went, because right after this, he shows her his scars and explains just how much her actions and playing with his heart brought him to a deep depression. Knowing what I know, I think he came to this direction because after hearing about what Tom was doing, he might have processed the situation as, oh, you've done this to me in the past before and I really can't afford to go through all that again. So that was the moment he decided to just spill his guts and say that while he would always love her, he just couldn't get involved in her life anymore. I think that's it's not specific, but I think this is how the conversation went, because what she does next feels justified in a way. When Charlie was wrapping up his thoughts and getting ready to say goodbye, his mom got angry and called him an awful son that deserved everything he got throughout his life. She was happy about how unhappy he was. Charlie told her that her words could no longer hurt him, so she stood up, lit a cig, and walked out of that cafe, making it clear that she was going to walk this path alone, leaving no room to support. Months go by and Charlie moves on, with Bandit back by his side. His responsibility in the raft increased, working as both a tour guide and a bushcraft instructor. Working for a long while now, he began to understand that his life with the military was nothing more than being a cog in the machine. He didn't stop loving the job, but the fact that there wasn't fair compensation for the people who provided their services. So he signed a premature voluntary release that would let him go August next year. The computer couldn't convince him to reconsider, and neither could his supervisors. Knowing that his time was ending soon, an unbelievable weight was lifted off his shoulders, and he could now focus on his personal well-being. But again, Charlie could never seem to catch a break. Around the same time, he got the news that his mom has developed motor neuron disease, also known as ALS, the same condition Stephen Hawking had. The symptoms of her stroke did a good job masking this disease, so the doctors couldn't really pinpoint exactly how long she had to live, until Christmas time when she caught pneumonia and was sure to pass within a few days. Given a month's leave, Charlie drove down to the hospital and joins his sisters to visit their mom, who was now very skeletal and semi-conscious. They each had their turn to share their individual love for her, and even Charlie, despite their history, wished her death to come soon so that her suffering would finally end. The doctor said that she had 1% chance to survive that night, but she beat those odds and made this miraculous improvement by Christmas Day, which made Charlie confused and depressed. He knew that she must have been miserable, bedridden, and fed through a tube, and just the thought of wishing his mom dead was confusing as hell. And in spite of all that confusion, the urge to cut himself crept back in his mind, and all he felt like doing was spending that whole day cutting himself, trying to find some feeling back in his nerves. After Christmas, he returned to the airbase, continued his duties, stretched out that forced smile for his friends, and on one challenging evening, he decided to go into his room for a cut session. Getting ready to carve into his bad habits once more, Bandit wakes up just in time for lunch. He ran up to his owner's face, tugged at his hair, nibbled at the lobe of his ear, did just about anything for attention, which did wonders to snap Charlie out of his slump. On another day, Charlie heard news about a man jumping off a bridge to end his life, and this sudden wave of depression directed him toward the nearest bridge he could find. He stood on the beam, listening to the traffic below, and while all his worries were consuming him, he couldn't help but think about Bandit. What will happen to the ferret if Charlie went through with this? Who will feed him, care for him? I mean, there wouldn't be any better owner than Charlie to take care of him, right? So we ditched the bridge idea. But yet another wave caught him on the drive back home. There was a curve coming up half a mile away and Charlie was accelerating at 70 miles per hour. He was hoping to make it a swift death until he remembered that he forgot to feed Bandit and quickly stepped on the brakes. It seemed impossible for him to think about dying with Bandit popping up every time. From then on, he would always thank that furry friend for being the one thing that kept him going and living. Long enough to visit his mom for the last time, February 2017. At this stage, she lost function in her throat and mouth muscles, having to rely on machinery to speak whenever she typed. until she got annoyed with it and threw it at the foot of the bed. But it was generally a sincere moment. They laughed, they talked, he played with her bed controls, she tried her very best to sing. The last memory he got from her was a simple kiss and her weak hands rustling his hair as he laid his face on her chest. He could sense that this would be the last time they'll be together, so he wanted to make this a pleasant moment, free of the past for just this one moment. And when Charlie was ready to go, the last image of his dying mother was her half smile and soft brown eyes, knowing that neither walked out depressed or angry, but finally making amends. March rolled around as Charlie was getting ready for leave from May to August, ending his ties with the military. He thought hard about how to proceed afterwards, hoping to follow his dream of teaching people about the outdoors. I didn't cover it as much, but his affiliation with nature is rooted in almost every chapter, so for him to come to this conclusion is simply natural. Pun intended. But of course, this story can't give Charlie a break, because Tom is freaking Tom. As if he wasn't enough of a headache, never learning to change his ways, with his lover on the deathbed, he tries to sneak a marriage without any of her family or children to bear witness. Charlie tried to shut this down, telling the chaplain that his mom wasn't in the right mindset and Tom's history with abuse and sneaky relationships, but there was nothing that could be done since his mom wasn't saying no. That triggered his suicide tendencies later that evening, until we got a call from Tom himself. After the history they had, the conversation could just be about the wedding, so Charlie braced himself for a barrage of insults for trying to stop it, which would probably lead into more arguments about the past and how horrible the time was living together. But no. Tom just called to deliver the news. Charlie's mom finally passed away. The story begins to conclude around the preparation for her funeral. With his older sister away on holiday, Charlie took responsibility to collect documents and personal belongings from the hospice, meeting up with Tom and his mom's side of the family. The same people who believed Tom's lies in the past, but aside from one relative, there was no malice in that room. They all offered their condolences to Charlie, knowing how terrible it must be for him right now. Even Tom, the master of misery, extended his hand, and Charlie embraced it. With everyone together having conversations about her and understanding how she lived her life, Charlie takes a moment of deep reflection to look at his own life and how it was shaped and formed by his experiences. He can say that he had no regrets for how his life turned out and was finally able to let go of all his anger to move on. And with that, Charlie understood his path in life, and with his trusty companion Bandit, the world was theirs to travel and embark on many adventures, raising money for ALS and exploring Europe. So while half the book focuses on Charlie telling the story, the other half provides a lot of life lessons he learned while growing up. As he said in the preface, this book exists to empower the reader, touching upon several situations in which you might not know what to do. Charlie enlightens you with solutions that can improve your life. It wasn't what I was expecting, but there's something to gain from this. I really believe it. Even if you heard these before, it doesn't hurt to have a reminder. With what's going on with the world right now, it's just depressing. There's no denying that, so to come across a book harboring nothing but good vibes is refreshing. Reading it once and skimming it twice, I can feel that Charlie had no other intention than to make you feel that life is really worth living for. If I could just take this time to pick out some lessons he shared that really struck a chord with me, I think it would better demonstrate what I mean when I say you could apply them to your own life. So jumping back to the story, when Charlie was working at that plant maintenance business with one of his supervisors named Shorty, who tried to downsize his ambitions of joining the RAF, he learned about understanding perspective and sticking to your goals. Of course, we know now that things didn't turn out as he hoped in the long run, but Charlie was never disheartened to quit so easily. He proved time and time again that he's a prideful man who can endure what life throws at him. A little stubborn at points, I'll admit, but I really admire people like him. the kind who can brace themselves in certain situations for the sake of their hopes and dreams. In the chapter that follows this, he writes a lesson about sympathy and understanding where someone is coming from with their opinions and views. For someone like me who deals with criticism and opinions of their artistic pursuits, this really touched home, especially when he recalls a short poem by Max Ehrmann called, and I'm sorry if I butcher the title of this, Desiderata. As far as possible without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. I fondly remember how I used to hate the comments because of how toxic they've been in the past. I was growing that mentality of just plain ignorant and keep doing my own thing. That was one option until I took a moment to let the internal heat die to really understand what the people were saying. And as much as it hurt, I learned to grow and improve. Now don't get me wrong, there were some hateful things said, but I learned not to mix it with the actual feedback given. I needed to grow as a content creator. Getting the pat on the back is great. Don't get me wrong, I love don't get me wrong, sometimes it just strokes my own ego getting praise for all the hard work I do. Thanks for that, but sometimes it just doesn't give me exactly what I need to improve or what could be done better with my videos, because we all have that potential to do better. And he also does his best to vocalize his opinions on certain subjects, like how it's not bad to pursue an education, but just making it the only thing in your life isn't really ideal, which is why he decided to drop out of college and join the Air Force. He was looking for something a little more practical and essential to everyday life, which might have justified his dreams to teach people about the outdoors, because those skills are useful too. And it's not wrong to, of course you need the certain credentials to reach a job, being a doctor, being a lawyer. But I guess in terms of Charlie, what he had to go through, I guess college just wasn't for him. And he just dropped out and just did his own thing. Throughout the story, while not clearly stated, he demonstrated his stance as a pure pacifist. He always chose the high road and never engaged unless necessary, which is pretty evident with his scuffle against Tom. He takes a moment to talk about physical violence and the ludicrous thought of being completely opposed to fighting and just letting it happen. No, he took charge once Tom finally got handsy and tried to choke him out. Words can't kill you, but if someone lays their hands on you, the very least you can do is push them and protect your boundaries. And when he was on deployment and suffering from depression and self-harm, he discussed the importance of staying calm, a technique so easily brushed off. We're very quick to react or freak out from the overwhelming pressures of our minds, but Charlie reminds you that you can't tackle those issues and problems with the same mental attitude that got you into them in the first place. Think clearer, and that in turn will help in better choices. Lessons of sympathy, compassion, there's a lot of topics being touched upon here. Even trivial facts that might feel like he's just padding the book with filler knowledge, but they do find their reason within the context of the story. There's a lot to discuss, and I'm sure if you read through this story once, you can find something that matches your own feelings. So here we are at the end. My overall thoughts, this was a really motivating book. While I can see the filler portions of the story padding out the length of the book, Charlie really goes about teaching life lessons by just sharing his life, and I really appreciate that. I really admire it. I don't think it's easy for anyone to relive such trauma of their past, but I'm glad he did it and brought out his experiences for the sole purpose that someone would gain something from this. Someone would gain a positive note to take from this. And I'm really happy that his life got better by the end. I'm unsure what he's doing right now, but from his Instagram and Facebook posts, he's living on a boat with his girlfriend, sailing the seas and having their own adventures. I believe Bandit has now passed away, but that shouldn't be seen as a bad thing. From what his journey told, this little ferret saved his life in so many ways, giving him the opportunity to become this motivational speaker and fundraiser. He's even got a YouTube channel giving out some quotes. I don't know how active he is, but I subscribe just in case he does post something, just to check on him and see how he's doing. I'll leave some of his links in the description down below just so you can see the man yourself, just oozing with positivity. And Charles, if somehow, some way, someone just brings you to this review and you're just watching it and you made it to this point, hopefully, I really enjoyed your book. I've had my own history with depression, so to see someone come out from that experience with such wisdom is very encouraging, and I hope to implement that same kind of hope and positivity with my own story someday. So thank you. Really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing your story. And on that note, I feel like it wraps up the first episode of Reading Rookie. Oh man, I think it went pretty smoothly for a first episode. But I don't know, I'll let you all be the judge of that. You roast me, let me know if I need to fix anything, or if it's okay the way it is. You know, we just went through the lesson. I just explained criticism and feedback. So help me help you. But yeah, I'm excited for the future of this series, how it's gonna go. Thank you all for watching, and a huge thanks to my Patreon supporters, my 3 little pages. Remember, depending on the tier, you can get these videos, the BVMs, the Reading Rookies, 1 week in advance, as well as participating in polls soon for doing deciding what future projects I'll be doing. So if you want to support the channel while getting great benefits out of it and feeling like your choice matters and what the next video might be, I would love to have you aboard this journey. And this will be the ideal time too, since we are finally starting the batch review, my batch review system. And if you don't know what that is, you can look at my go to the homepage of my channel and you can watch the Welcome to H Pages Deep video, and it explains it all there. But yeah, I'm finally getting started. We are actually getting into some more organized reviews that you guys want to see, starting with Harry Potter, but now talking about it with what went on. I can't catch a break. I really can't catch a break. After putting it off for so long, I'm finally getting back into it. I'm actually going to finish the series this time, but then the whole J.K. Rowling thing and her tweets, and I don't know. I mean, part of me is like, when's the right time? If I push it off now, am I ever gonna get back to it again? Like, should I just wait a while? I don't know. You guys let me decide what you want to see, but I feel like if I push it off right now, it's never going to get done, and I kind of feel like at this point I should just rip off the band-aid and just get it over with. But I don't know. It's really awkward. I don't know what to say about it, but if anything, I'll just post an update in the community post and decide what I do with that based on your feedback and based on what you guys want to see. I'll ask about it later. But yeah, more on that later. I hope you enjoyed this first episode. Let me know what you think. I really want to hear your opinions on this. And yeah, I'll keep in touch with you all soon. Take care, guys. And thanks for listening. Peace.